This is a CBC podcast.
Hi there, I'm Jian Gomeshi, inviting you to enter the world of arts, cultural affairs, and entertainment with Q's video podcast. Feature interviews with the people and personalities shaping, captivating, and challenging culture, delivered to your mobile device 3 times a week. Visit cbc.ca/Q to subscribe to the Q video podcast and watch what we're doing.
Hello, I'm Matthew Lazenrider. This is The Invisible Hand. This summer, we're going to join you each week at this time to talk about economics. In case you're wondering, the invisible hand is an idea from an 18th century Scottish philosopher named Adam Smith. He described how people, each acting in their own self-interest, could benefit society as a whole. In this series, we'll tell you some of the surprising ways the hand still pushes and pulls, and some cases when it slaps back.
We are 99%. Come join us! Come join us! Because you too are the 99%!
It was sparked by an online call-out from the Vancouver-based Adbusters Media Foundation.
The Occupy movement. It popped up in cities around Canada and the world last September. Demonstrators camped out in public spaces for months to protest economic inequality, corporate corruption, and greed. They chanted, "People before profits." They asked why the system pays so many benefits to so few people at the top of the corporate food chain. Now here's the thing. No one's going to defend economic unfairness, or white-collar swindlers, or corporations that break the rules to make more money. But many economists say the pursuit of profit itself is nothing to protest. And the people who benefit from profit, why, they're not so different from you and me. Stay with us. By the end of today's episode of The Invisible Hand, we're 99% sure you'll want to reach out and hug the capitalist in your life.
The tech industry got a big boost. Chipmaker Intel reported profits jumped nearly 50% last quarter.
BMW set new records in sales, revenues and profits last year.
The day doesn't go by without one of our big 4 banks announcing another great big profit.
The year the Occupy movement debated the distribution of wealth, Royal Bank of Canada made $6.7 billion in profit. Philip Morris Tobacco Company posted profits in North America somewhere around $8.5 billion. In Canada and the United States, ExxonMobil made $41 billion in profits. Those kinds of numbers positioned big business against the little guy in the minds of the occupiers. They saw those profits staying with the rich instead of being distributed to everyone. We wanted to see if that populist opinion is still popular today, months after the last Occupy camp packed up its last tent. To find out, we hit the streets to ask people in Vancouver where they think corporate profits end up.
Who do you think benefits most from profits? Not me. Not the people. Whoever's already got money, basically.
Corporate businessmen, billionaires, the corporate profit mongers.
Well, I think the 1% are the people that, and it's backed up by statistics, that they are the ones that are reaping most of the money and keeping it.
The guy in the top hat with the cigar.
Okay, into the pockets of the 1%, the corporate profit mongers, the billionaires. That's where the people we heard from think profits end up. But many economists would tell you that isn't necessarily so. First off, they'd make a distinction about the 1%. That statistic refers to that sliver of population that earns the most money. For example, in 2009, the top 1% of earners took in just under 11% of all the income. But if you break that top 1% down, you'll find that here in Canada, most of that 1% makes most of its money in the form of salaries or wages. When you work for money, no matter how big your paycheck, it's not considered profit. For the corporation, it's an expense. So you might be thinking, well, the expense of that paycheck comes from profits, right? Well, a rich CEO can successfully run a company into the ground, lose all the profits, and still walk away with $1 million paycheck. So if the 1%ers aren't snapping up all of that profit, who is? That's what we'll be looking at today. We'll start off with a look at what profit actually is. The standard definition: if you sell something for more than it cost you to make, then you've made a profit. We headed to Laval University to see if there's more to it, and turns out there is. Economist Stephen Gordon looks at profit, and he sees a whole system at work.
I see a return on a factor of production. Basically, two things go into making things, to generating income. Labor, we all know about that, and capital.
Well, that's pretty economisty. So let's break it down with a textbook tool, the lemonade stand.
My very first lemonade stand, we set it up just across the street from our house.
Sadie and Leo Quinn's little venture on the sidewalk in Vancouver is a good example. You've got your labor, that's Sadie and Leo, and you've got your capital, that's the jug, the spoon, and the cups. Basically, capital is whatever the labor uses to make money. And then you've got your capitalists, mom and dad. They're the people who provided the cups and spoons and jugs in the first place.
We made $26, so we did really well.
In the real world, that $26 would be shared between the labor and the capitalists. Whatever the capitalists, mom and dad, take, that's the profit. But for some reason, at the Quinn household, the capitalists gave all the money to the labor, Sadie and Leo. Which is probably why you don't hear a lot of protests like this.
Lemonade stand's got to go, hey, hey! Ho, ho! Lemonade stand.
No. Everything here is summer sunshine and lemonade. Of course, in this simplistic example, the capitalists are mom and pop. They're pretty far from the protest-worthy profit mongers we heard described earlier. In fact, as far as many economists are concerned, capitalists are an essential part of the marketplace. So how is it that they got such a bad rap? Pop culture may have played a part. Some of the greatest movies ever made are about an evil tycoon steamrolling our hapless hero in a self-centered quest for profit. Like Tex Richmond, the oil baron who wants to steal the home of the Muppets.
We humbly ask that you give us back our studio.
Well, Mr. the Frog, let me see.
I'm Tex Richmond, Mr. Texas.
Or Potter in It's a Wonderful Life.
Miserable little clerk crawling in here on your hands and knees and begging for help.
Or Hedley Lamar of Blazing Saddles.
When that railroad goes through Rock Ridge, that land will be worth millions. And I want it.
Or Noah Cross of Chinatown.
How much better can you eat? What can you buy that you can't already afford?
The future, Mr. Gitz. The future.
So in the movies, the capitalist is often interchangeable with the villain. Let's see how the story plays out in the real-life media. One story from Canada and the United States had a lot of people shaking their heads over the profit motive. In the early 1990s, Dan Pallotta was living in California. He saw the public reaction to the growing HIV epidemic and saw an opportunity to make a buck through fundraising.
Yeah, well, anybody who was in their 30s in the early 90s lost, dozens of friends to AIDS, and all you could do was go rent a tuxedo and go to the local AIDS charity gala chicken dinner and sit and have a Caesar salad and make small talk with people.
His solution was to put on a bike ride. He and his company created the AIDS Rides and Breast Cancer 3 Days, big international charity bike riding events. He promoted the heck out of them with glitzy ads and slogans.
To make AIDS history.
To make AIDS history.
To make AIDS history in the 2001 Pallotta Teamworks AIDS Vaccine Rides.
Dan's events made millions for AIDS and breast cancer research. They also made money for Dan himself. You see, his company was not a charity or a non-profit. It was a full-on, for-profit company. As his events grew, so did his pocketbook, and so did scrutiny of Dan's company, Pallotta Teamworks. Soon, donors and the public complained he was spending too much on overhead, and not enough of the donations were making it to the charities he claimed to help.
A narrative started to get created in the press that, if we did an event and $4 million went into expenses, people would look at that $4 million that went into expenses and somehow think that we kept $4 million when in fact our fee was probably $250,000 or $350,000.
Eventually, all the bad press and controversy led charities to back out of the rides. Pallotta Teamworks closed its doors and stopped cashing in on those $300,000 paydays. So in the movies and in the news, people who live off the profits they make from others get a bad rap. Again, we wanted to see how that storyline plays out in real life. We hit the streets of Vancouver to ask people there to describe a capitalist.
Possibly wearing a top hat with a cigar is sort of the thing that really comes to mind, I would say. Kind of fat cat.
In the mind, the caricature is of like an evil person that's like trying to move society to maximize the profits, and we don't care what we're producing, if we're producing anything.
Really, especially white. Very white.
He lives in a high-rise building overlooking maybe some water and probably a lot of concrete. And he has his minions who do his bidding. And there isn't a whole lot of love in his soul, unfortunately.
Okay, so the popular image of the capitalist is male, white, with lots of minions. Let's see how that image stands up when we meet a real-life, pure capitalist. Someone who lives off nothing but the returns on the capital handed over to other people to work with.
You get two of those yellow...
This is Barbara Howard. We're in her sunny kitchen overlooking Burrard Inlet in Burnaby, British Columbia. Barbara's already made her mark on Canadian society.
It's announced that I was inducted into the BC Sports Hall of Fame. I've had lots of speeches to make.
At just 17, she represented Canada as a sprinter in the 1938 Empire Games. Barbara enjoyed a long and happy career afterward as a school teacher. But when the offer came, she was ready.
I retired when I was 64, and I'm 92 now. The school board offered the older teachers full pension if they retired early, so that you could bring in new teachers.
Even now, at age 92, Barbara is still doing her bit.
I still do a lot of volunteering in my church. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at the Confederation Center. Thursday.
She can afford to spend her time thanks to profit.
You know, I don't think I've ever had to take a loan from the bank. Even I have a car fund. About every 8 years or so, I get a new car, a newish car.
That's right. For the past 30 years, Barbara Howard has lived off the avails of profit. Economist Stephen Gordon says Barbara is way closer to his picture of what a capitalist is. It's an image that's pretty far from the Victorian-era villain you see in the movies.
It might be a hangover from the old days when it really was the case that the really big capital holdings were held by rich people. And their income was capital income, profit. So if you're looking for the really rich people back then, people that are really earning lots of money, they were people who owned lots of capital. These days, that's not really the case. If you're trying to track a dollar of profit, you'd be much more likely to reach a retired teacher.
Huh, a retired teacher. In a moment, we'll track the rather simple way that profit goes from a great big corporation into the bank account of a nonagenarian like Barbara Howard, as if the money was plucked by an invisible hand. And this is The Invisible Hand. I'm Matthew Lazenrider. You can find us on Twitter at CBC The Hand, and each week this summer right here on CBC Radio 1 and Sirius 159. We've heard a bit about the place profit may occupy in the minds of movie makers and news stories, but many economists say the pursuit of profit is absolutely essential. Let's dig a little bit further now to find out why that is. If all the players in a market are acting in their own self-interest to make a profit, and they aren't playing dirty, then the force of all that profit pursuit keeps the economy moving. Economists like Stephen Gordon see profit as a few things: the reward for taking risks, for innovation, and for efficiency. Let's take a closer look at the first item on that list. Like, check out this 70s documentary from the British company EMI on the creation of an important medical device.
The scanner is a new technology, a means of seeing details of the human brain and body. It was invented and developed at EMI's research laboratories near London. It's called CT for short. Godfrey Hounsfield has gained many international awards.
I think I'm very lucky to have thought of this. I was thinking about it quite a lot, wandering around the countryside.
So the CT scanner was invented by a guy who had a lot of time to walk along the moors thinking about X-rays. But you can actually thank these guys for making it possible.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles!
EMI is now just a record label, but it used to be in the business of making electrical equipment. After 1962, most of its profit was coming from its recordings of the Beatles. The company made so much profit, it was able to divert some of those riches to a big risk idea from a brilliant but obscure researcher. The Beatles broke up in 1970, but 2 years later, the first EMI CAT scan machine hit the market, and the researcher behind it won the Nobel Prize. It was a revolution in medical diagnostics thanks to those profitable Liverpudlians and their money-making label. Let's continue now with our look at why some economists are so fond of profit. Item number 2, it's a reward for innovation. EMI was allowed to take a risk to make the CT machine because of profit, but for some companies, innovation is the lifeblood. They've always got to be looking for the next big thing. That's the case with one big profit maker, Big Pharma. Let's head back to the Occupy movement, protesting outside a pharmaceutical company headquarters.
Mic check! Mic check! If you don't know! If you don't know! Pfizer is a pharmaceutical company! Pfizer is a pharmaceutical company! That makes life-saving pills! That makes life-saving pills! For about 5 cents! For about 5 cents! And then they resell those pills! And then they resell those pills! For about $50! For about
What the protesters are saying is completely true. Pills are mostly made of milk sugar and cornstarch, worth pennies at best. And then the company that made the pills sells them at a great big markup. But those profits are the result of a bunch of money spent years and years ago. In a way, a big chunk of those profits were already spent on making the science behind the pills to begin with. In the case of Pfizer, which makes the most profitable, best-selling prescription drug of all time, Lipitor, that research came from the profits of a much more humble product.
Try Listerine, buy Listerine, keep breath fresh and clean with Listerine. Try Listerine.
Yes, Listerine. If you were buying Listerine in the 80s, part of the difference between what you paid for a bottle and what it cost the company to make the bottle went into the creation of Lipitor.
Do we have some Oral B in the fridge somewhere?
That's Kishore Wasan, a pharmaceutical researcher with UBC's Neglected Global Diseases Initiative. He works on treatments for diseases that are too unprofitable for big drug companies to put much research into on their own. He's trying to create a better treatment for a potentially deadly fungal infection that's common in the developing world. He might sound like the last guy to stand up and cheer for big pharma profits. But
they're not the big evil empire that a lot of people think.
His research is partly funded by Ico Therapeutics, a Vancouver drug company. And what's in it for them?
Well, it's sort of a win-win for the company in the following way. One, they get tremendous PR and a humanitarian effort, but they're actually going to make some profit from our oral formulation because it also treats blood-borne fungal infections, which are major infections here in the developed world.
Now, one of the big criticisms of big pharma companies is they don't do as much innovation as they used to, that they try to squeeze as much revenue as possible out of existing drugs, instead of looking for profits from new drugs. So there's an opportunity for a new company to come in and do the innovation.
So Ico is going to make money from that. It's going to be sold as a regular old product, and they'll make profit from that and all the normal things that we do. But for the developing world indication, they're going to be able to do it for free.
So profit is a reward for innovation. It's a reward for taking a risk. It's also a reward for efficiency. Remember Dan Pallotta? People practically ran him out of town when they learned of the profits he was making from non-profit charities.
A militia of might and might be.
But there's a postscript to his story. And it turns out Dan's drive for profit was what made him an efficient fundraiser.
In the 2001 Pallotta Teamworks AIDS vaccine rides.
The last year his company ran the AIDS ride, he brought in over $11 million, with a little over half that going to charity. When the charities took over, using a nonprofit model, they raised just $4 million, with less than half going back to the charities. Dan Pallotta's for-profit money-making machine was more efficient at getting money to charities than charities themselves. He ended up writing a book about his work. It's called Uncharitable. In it, he argues that nonprofits would benefit from being able to run more like for-profit business.
So we have these two rule books. We have one for charity, one for the rest of the economic world. We blame capitalism for creating these huge inequities in our society, and then we refuse to allow the nonprofit sector to actually use the tools of capitalism to rectify those inequities. If we allowed the nonprofit sector to pay people based on their performance without limit, if we gave them a stock market to provide the incentive for all of this capital, we could unleash a kind of potential in the nonprofit sector that we cannot imagine, and the nonprofit sector could actually begin to solve some of these massive problems.
Dan also says, in a broad sense, we need to come to love the term profit.
You wouldn't put the money into a cancer drug research company that didn't intend to make a profit. It's not just fat cat executives. Oil companies are mostly they're owned by pension funds. They're owned by mutual funds. And so this notion that there's some 2 or 3 billionaire pals that own the oil companies is a fiction. I would like people to think rationally about it and think about the ways that they seek profit in their own lives.
Wait a minute. Profit at work in our own lives? Well, his comments about pension funds. Let's look a little closer at that. Whether you agree with the occupiers or the economists about the merits of profit making, there's still the issue of who ultimately benefits when profits are made. So we know that some of it goes to R&D and expansion and other investments, but what about the rest? Which cigar-chomping pinstriper gets their hands on all that profit? Let's hear from Stephen Gordon, Laval University economist.
Well, you're going to think of somebody who's a pure capitalist as someone who is earning income, who is not working. It's somebody who's retired. It's your grandma who's sitting in her nice little house in suburban Toronto, living a quiet life. She is the pure capitalist.
Yep, he just called your grandma a capitalist. He'd say the same thing about your granddad, too, and the kindly 92-year-old lady down the street. To show you why he'd say something like that, let's head back to Burnaby, British Columbia, and visit some more with Barbara Howard. When we last checked in, she was pretending to be just a retired school teacher, but economist Stephen Gordon has just exposed her as a pure capitalist. Let's see how she explains her fall from grace.
My mother said, get a good job so you can help yourself and be secure. I decided I was going to be a teacher. My first salary was $98 a month, and I guess we started paying into the pension plan at that point.
And that is trait number 1 of a capitalist. They contribute capital to support other people's labor in hopes that it turns a profit. In this case, a little money was taken from that $98 monthly salary and held by a pension fund. Eventually, some of that money was given to a company to help that business grow in hopes of making a profit. Now, trait number 2, the capitalist collects a share of the results of other people's labor. And when that business makes a big enough profit, it pays a dividend, a cut off the top, back to the pension fund. And that money goes into Barbara's pension check. And what does that check mean to her?
Oh, such a lot. I came up very frugal, and we didn't know what was going to happen from year to year. So I never wasted my money.
So, like our capitalist Barbara, when you pay into a pension, and if you get paid to work, you do pay into either the Canada Pension Plan or the Quebec Pension Plan, that money isn't just sitting somewhere waiting for you to retire. Here again, economist Stephen Gordon.
The real big holdings of capital are held by ordinary people, all together, jointly. It's no longer these very small numbers of people wearing top hats, making billions of dollars that way. People saving for their retirement, you don't want them to put little bits and buried bits of gold in the backyard. Like, that's valuable stuff. That's a valuable asset. You want it to be out there, productive, using, doing something useful.
And the useful places we put our money? Our mutual funds, RRSPs, pension plans. Firms then take that money and buy little bits of corporations, and that lets corporations buy new capital. When those corporations make enough profit, they pay a dividend, a little bit of profit that goes back to the capitalist. And if you've got a pension, that's you. Forget Tex Richmond and Noah Cross. You are the capitalist. It is time to get yourself a top hat. In fact, pension funds are now the biggest institutional investors in the world. Remember the companies we mentioned at the start of the show? The ones that made those huge profits? Exxon, Royal Bank, Philip Morris? They're all part of the holdings of the CPP. You can actually tour around a city like Vancouver and spot all of the capital that one day may provide the profits that will support you in your retirement.
Can you back out or do you want to swing around?
We took Barbara Howard on just such a tour. First stop, a Starbucks outlet. The BC Teachers Pension owns a chunk of the Seattle Giant.
I didn't know that. But I'm not really a coffee drinker, but I know a lot of people. Better not discourage them from drinking coffee.
And then we visit a Canadian corporate icon.
Donuts. Oh, well, it's successful. Yeah.
The CPP has more than 1 million shares of Tim Hortons.
The best donuts in the world.
And you can't make donuts without wheat flour. Barbara's pension plans have big holdings in Viterra, the company that owns this grain terminal.
Great big bins. All sorts of activity.
And those shares pay regular dividends. Pure profit. And back on Barbara's sun deck, surrounded by her prized rhododendrons, there's more evidence of her investments.
There's a train. I love to hear the train.
Barbara's pension fund owns shares in CP Rail as well.
It makes me feel a little bit more secure when I think they invested in good companies.
So that you can add as a fourth reward for profit. It also means that a legacy of capital is left by one generation for the next. One last time, economist Stephen Gordon.
This is one of the things about how the market works. It's not as if people are intentionally saving so that other people could have good jobs. They're saving because they want to have a good retirement. The fact that it generates income for other people is a very happy side effect. That's another classic example of the invisible hand at work.
The invisible hand at work. Taking a little bit off yesterday's paycheck, turning it into today's capital so you can retire tomorrow. And if you haven't done it in a while, give your capitalist grandma a call or a hug. Just a little thank you for her investment in your future. And the next time those stories come out about some bank raking in record numbers, just think about who may ultimately stand to profit. The invisible hand might just be pointing at you. Or your grandma. There's a 99% chance you'll want to occupy some space in our inbox. Our email address is invisiblehand@cbc.ca. You can check out more about the profit motive and download a podcast of this episode at our webpage, cbc.ca/theinvisiblehand. Our show is produced by Jeff Turner. Our economic consultant is Stephen Gordon. Our senior producer is Karen Burgess. I'm Matthew Lazen Ryder.
Looking for more CBC podcasts? Go to cbc.ca/podcasting.